Welcome back to the Communication Mastery Podcast with me, Mark Burlinson. We're unleashing the power of understanding to build bridges and not boxes, because we understand that communication is the oxygen of teamwork. And in this series, we're looking particularly at the executive questions around the area of communication. We're looking at the C-suite and the areas that company executives have to bear in mind in the whole communication space. So this week, we want to look at your company culture and employee engagement. And I've got a number of questions that I'm asked in this area to answer for you today. The first question is this: how do I create a culture of open communication and transparency? That can be a very difficult task in an organization, can't it? And what you want to do is to lead by example and then build trust in your interactions with all of the employees in the company as best you can, creating systems that encourage open dialogue. So when you lead by example, your employees will take a cue from your leadership, and transparency really starts at the top. So be open about the decisions that you're making. Share the why of what you're doing, not just the what you're doing. And when there is a mistake, it's good to admit a mistake, particularly if you're reassuring your employees that this isn't going to take us off track. We've seen the mistake, we know what we're doing, this is the adjustment we're making, that kind of thing. And if you encourage tough questions, then you're going to create a culture of openness within your employee team. And the second part to this would be to make communication a two-way street. So if you're encouraging those tough questions, you can help your employees to feel heard and not just spoken to. Very important to get their feedback. Here's something you can do. Create a culture where it's okay to go above your own line manager to talk to somebody higher up the chain of command about something that concerns you. This is not to go behind their back. You're probably going to take it back to that middle manager after you've heard the concern, but it helps the employee to feel valued if they're not trapped in a line of command that may make them feel restricted in their communication. And the other thing you can do as the executive is to remove any kind of fear or blame from the workplace. It's not easy to do that if you've developed a culture of fear and blame, but people won't speak up if they fear negative consequences. So reward constructive feedback and cultivate a learning culture, not a blaming culture. Because that will help each person to step up with what they see and what they hear with their useful input to the process of a culture of open communication in your company. The second question is, how can I ensure that employees feel heard and valued without creating information overload? This would be a challenge of what we just talked about with that open communication culture, because if you get so much communication that you can't cope with it, it's no value to you. So you want to create structured listening channels. So you're giving opportunity to your employees to share their feedback, but without overwhelming leadership or teams. So have a regular check-in schedule where there's a round table with the leadership, for example, maybe quarterly or maybe every 6 months. Do short and frequent pulse surveys just through the company intranet or through your Teams or Slack channels. Just 2 or 3 question surveys that gauge people's sentiment or their understanding of an issue without creating survey fatigue. And then train your managers to receive and escalate any employee concerns in the right ways, so that there are maybe anonymous feedback options that they can leverage to pass on any issues that are arising but are hidden below the surface. Bring them to the surface so that you can make sure your employees do feel heard. I mentioned this thing and somebody actually heard me. That's going to create a greater feedback culture in the future. And as you reverse that process and communicate to your employees, make sure that they don't feel overwhelmed with information as well. Segment your information so that employees are only being told what's relevant to each level or each team. Not everyone needs every detail of what you have to communicate. But also, if you can create a company-wide definition to when do we email, when do we use Slack, when do we use meetings, when do we contribute to an internal dashboard, those kinds of things, which communications go where, that's another important way to help your employees not feel overwhelmed by the diversity of communication that's in a 21st century company. And make sure there's a single source of truth. If you've got a company intranet or a regular leadership newsletter, or preferably a video update that gives the truth and the facts and the source of the vision for the company, that helps everyone to stay aligned. And when you're using meetings and one-on-ones, use them strategically. So you don't have unnecessary meetings, but you create enough personal connection that there's still efficiency to that two-way conversation. We've said before on the podcast that the best way to communicate is face-to-face, or at least voice-to-voice. And there needs to be some element of that with your employees to see you communicate with them, to hear you communicate with them, and have the opportunity to speak back and ask questions or raise issues. But use those one-on-ones and meetings strategically. Don't have a meeting when you could have some kind of asynchronous update where you send out a company-wide message and there's a link to respond, or you send an update request to a team and they can respond on a bulletin board in some way. And then also give your employees direct but structured access to the executives. So rotate your leadership Q&A sessions. Maybe the CFO can answer questions on one occasion. Maybe the COO or the chief of HR can answer questions on another occasion. Make sure that there's opportunity to address every area of your company's leadership in some way over time. And then keep the communication as clear and concise as you can. Maybe have somebody that you pull in to help you clarify your message and make sure that there aren't areas where you could be misunderstood by some of the different communication styles. And limit the leadership messages to key takeaways. Use bullet points, use summaries. Don't use jargon. Make it digestible. A short video can often be worth 100 handouts. Then maybe an infographic is better than a page of text. Those kinds of things to help it land with your employees will really help you. But the key takeaway for this question would be that employees feel heard when they speak up and it leads to action in some way. So prioritize that structured listening and strategic updates to your team where your thoughtful responses keep their engagement at a high level. Here's a third question. What's the best way to encourage upward communication from employees to leadership? This follows directly on from question 2, of course. You want to create channels for employees to share their thoughts and to offer their ideas. So there has to be a culture first of psychological safety. I was with an organization just a couple of weeks ago where they're recovering from a setting where the CEO was not a safe culture person. They had everything revolve around them, and you had to be careful not to step out of line or not to be seen to be pushing against the CEO's will. And that created huge dysfunction and mistrust in this particular organization. And employees won't speak up if they fear retaliation or they fear dismissal or they see that there's an erratic or unjust response to their communication upward to leadership. So train your managers to listen so that mid-level leadership isn't blocking feedback, but also teach them to escalate employee concerns back to the C-suite as appropriate. But also you will cultivate what you celebrate. And so if you have employees who challenge ideas in a constructive way, celebrate that. Maybe put out a short video where you're congratulating an employee for raising an issue that no one else had noticed. Or maybe it's that they'd asked a question in a way that helped you to formulate an answer in line with your vision, and you can celebrate that. Those kinds of celebrations of the actions you want to cultivate will really pay dividends in promoting upward communication. And you want to make upward communication routine rather than random. So you want to schedule regular feedback cycles. You could have an Ask Me Anything session with the executives, or you could create some kind of ideas mechanism where there's a structured suggestion process. Or you could also use those little short surveys that we talked about in the previous question, where there's a check-in that's 2 or 3 clicks to answer it, and that's all. People are used to doing that these days. A lot of retail companies use that when they've sold people something. What did you think about this? You can do the same in your company. And then when you get feedback in that way, act on it in a way that's visible to not just the people who gave the feedback, but all the people who didn't give the feedback as well. Because then they see, oh, feedback is appreciated and it's acted upon. Or even if you don't act on the feedback, you can acknowledge it and you can explain perhaps why you didn't implement the idea that was offered. But then if you highlight the implemented ideas, that creates a culture where people are motivated to speak up and to bring to you the feedback and the information, the input and the ideas that they have. Key takeaway is that upward communication isn't just about giving employees a voice. It's about showing that the leadership are truly listening and responding appropriately. So building trust in that way and acting on employee input wherever it's appropriate, then you can ensure that those valuable insights are flowing consistently up through the organization and everyone benefits. Now, here's a question from a different angle, but it's an equally challenging one in terms of company culture and employee motivation. How do I communicate major organizational changes without creating fear or resistance? Here, it's very important that you zero in on empathy, but you also need a great deal of clarity so that you can invite involvement. Because unless people feel involved in a major change, then they're going to lack trust and they'll be defaulting to uncertainty. And that creates fear and it also creates resistance. So you want to lead with transparency, but also with purpose. You want to be very clear on what this change is going to look like, why it's happening, and how you've planned to minimize the disruption or pain or challenge to your employees through that major change. Be clear about the why before you talk about the what. And connect the change to your company goal or to your long-term vision or to shifts in your market. It may simply be that this major change is because the world is different than it was 2 years ago, and we're adapting to meet that new challenge. You want to be clear and don't sugarcoat the potential impact, but also provide reassurance wherever you can. So we know this is going to be a challenge for 3 months, but we know that on the other side of it, we're going to be stronger, or we're going to be more resilient, or we're going to be closer to our target market, whatever it might be. That's the reason for you making the change. And then if you sense that there are rumors going around or misinformation, then be very clear in your messaging so that you can deal with that misinformation quickly. Don't let it get roots so that it'll grow. When you're delivering a message of major change, you want to deliver it with empathy. You need to acknowledge people's emotions and their concerns before you push for their acceptance. One of the things we say in any kind of communication in the company context is that you need to engage the responder language first before you move on to the other languages, because the responder language feels very deeply about whether I care about this and does my company care about me. So if you can communicate care first before you make a difficult announcement or explain a difficult decision, that will really help your audience to stay on track with you and know that you're using a personal tone, a human tone, a tone of empathy. Don't appear distant. Don't hide a difficult change behind company jargon. Use short, simple, straightforward terms to describe what it is that's changing, and acknowledge that there is uncertainty, but the leadership's committed to supporting your employees through that uncertainty. You can invite feedback and questions so that it shows that you're listening. So don't just broadcast it. Don't just send out a video saying this is going to change and I'll see you next week. Instead, invite people to come back to you with some form of questioning. There are all kinds of tools you can use these days, even if you're a remote company or some of your workers are not there in the building. You can use some of the online tools for people to put questions in anonymously so that they can be addressed in a future meeting or in a future communication. And then you also need to recognize that different stakeholders around the company process change differently. And so you want to tailor it to the whole company first with a CEO announcement or some kind of town hall meeting to introduce the change. But then you also need to equip middle managers with key briefing points, key talking points, so that they can be consistent in their application of the change, but also in their messaging around the change. And then you want to allow all of your employees to interact with the change through Q&A forums of some kind, including some of the tools that I mentioned just now that you can utilize where you don't have to have a meeting. You can have a Slack channel, or you can have, there are all kinds of different tools you can use to get feedback anonymously. And then give regular check-ins on the progress as you process the change so that the employees feel like they are included in the journey that you're all on together. And you can address the concerns that have been raised through the feedback channels you created. If you can, involve your employees in the transition, whatever change it is that you're announcing. If they're helping to create the change or helping to apply the change and shape it as it goes, then they'll feel much more supportive of the change than if it's just inflicted on them from on high. So you could form employee advisory groups to provide input or to help you to clarify concerns. You could allow teams to create their own solutions for how to implement the change in their specific setting. That creates trust because they know their situation better than you do. You outline the parameters, they figure out the strategy and the implementation plan. And then if you can highlight early wins as the change is rolled out, then that helps to keep your people on board and it reinforces positive momentum as well. And then the final question for this session would be, how can I better handle generational and cultural communication differences in my workforce? Because obviously in employee engagement and the culture of your company, there's a great deal of diversity, both generationally and culturally today. And so we want to have a culture of inclusion. We want to have intentional communication strategies that recognize generational differences as well as cultural differences. And so we need to really grow our adaptability. This is an area I find myself helping companies with more and more these days. How do we grow our adaptability? I don't want to be stuck in my one style of how I operate. I want to be able to adapt so that I keep all of my team working together despite their differences, or better still, to leverage their differences into strengths for our calling, for our vision, and for the goals that we're reaching together. So you're going to have to start off by recognizing and embracing the differences, because different generations, for example, have unique communication preferences. The baby boomers tend to prefer face-to-face communication or at best email rather than text and instant messaging. The Gen X generation, they value much more direct, efficient communication coupled with autonomy, giving them the freedom to decide what they're going to do and how they're going to do it from the communication that's been received. Millennials and Gen Z prefer a much more collaborative approach. They prefer that real-time digital communication where we can all collaborate together. Everybody can chip in with their perspective. And so this is where you're going to use tools like Slack or Teams to create the climate for that to flourish. And then there are cultural differences as well, aren't there? We've talked about this in previous episodes, but some cultures value more of a hierarchy and a formality in their communication, and then others prefer much more openness or informality. It's kind of like the difference between the sort of old style corporate America, where the head office dictates everything and everybody else falls in line and just sends their reports back, versus the newer technological culture, maybe of Silicon Valley, where everybody collaborates. And I think it was even Amazon that said that no team should be bigger than 2 pizzas. In other words, you've got few enough people that 2 pizzas is enough to feed everybody. Otherwise, the team is too big. That kind of difference in cultural outlook has to be taken into account. You have to recognize that and embrace it. You can't change those things to suit you. You have to adapt to them so that you get the most connection with each level of the generations, each diverse area of culture. And remember that nonverbal cues, feedback styles, expectations around decision making all vary. You can't have a one-size-fits-all approach to communication anymore. It has to be adaptable. Talking about adaptable, you've got to have a multi-channel communication approach. You need to use video, you need to use audio, you need to have verbal communication in meetings as well as written communication. You need to use visual cues like infographics or the videos, photographs, that kind of thing, so that everybody gets the chance to engage using their strongest communication styles and their strongest communication indicators, because otherwise you're going to lose people along the way. Again, one size doesn't fit all. You've got to have flexibility. And if this applies to your company, you need to be able to provide translations or cultural context if your team is more global or are spread across a number of different nations or cultures. And then you can promote cross-generational and cross-cultural understanding, where you can form teams in ways that each generation benefits from the others. It's been fun for me to watch some of the Gen Xers in companies that I work with learning from the millennials and the Gen Zs. And they're like, oh, wow, I'd never thought of doing it that way, but that really works today, doesn't it? That kind of approach. Or likewise, I also find that many Gen Z generation would really love to have somebody of an older generation that they can trust, who's not telling them what to do or how to do it, but is understanding where they're coming from and offering wisdom and expertise. So you can cultivate those kind of generational perspectives within your team. You can have learning circles where employees can discuss their perspectives. You can have intercultural training sessions where different folks can learn about each other and create that openness between the different cultures. But you have to establish an inclusive culture where every voice matters. It's not good enough to just have a multitude of different generations or a variety of different cultures. Every one of those voices needs to be drawn together. And you as the executive or as the executive leadership team need to show that you're valuing all of the different inputs and taking them into account as you weave them together into a company strategy that moves you towards your goals far more effectively, because you have to operate as a team. We often say that team means that together everyone achieves more, TEAM. And only when we acknowledge and accept cultural and generational diversity can we do that. So rotate who leads meetings, rotate who presents ideas, so that all the different generations and the different cultures have a voice at the table. You could celebrate milestones to reinforce inclusivity. Particularly cultural milestones, and then regularly ask all of your employees for feedback on the effectiveness of the communication that you've been doing. How much did you enjoy that video? Was that town hall meeting valuable to you? Was the last email from the CEO something that resonated with you? What suggestions do you have for how we can communicate better? Key takeaway is that bridging these gaps is not about creating uniformity, quite the opposite. It's about creating a workplace where different perspectives flourish together and thrive to make your company vision succeed. And this is where the Life Language Communication IQ system can be so helpful, because it's the only tool we have that helps us build bridges. So if this is new to you, reach out to me and ask me, how could that help my company oil the wheels of communication, especially in the area of culture and employee engagement? I've not come across a company that's used the Communication IQ system where the employees haven't felt more engaged as a result. So it's a powerful tool that you could take advantage of so that your company can also benefit. I'll be back next week with more C-suite insights and more C-suite questions. But for now, please recommend this podcast to a friend. Maybe subscribe on your favorite platform, or maybe text a link to today's episode to that person that came to mind somewhere through the episode and you thought, oh yeah, so-and-so needs to hear this. Text them now with a link to today's episode, and I'll see you back here next week.